The train rocked rhythmically as it cut through the dense wilderness of northern Oregon. Beth sat by the window, absently tracing her fingers along the condensation collecting on the glass. The dense pines blurred past her, their dark trunks merging into a seemingly endless wall of green. Her reflection in the glass was pale and gaunt, her dark hair limp against her face. She hadn't been sleeping too well, an understatement. The nightmares had started 3 weeks ago. She'd wake up drenched in sweat, clutching at her arms as if trying to peel something away. The sensation lingered long after waking, the sticky, pulsating warmth of flesh that wasn't hers. A sudden jolt of the train snapped her out of her thoughts. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their next stop, Blackwood Hollow. The name hung heavy in her mind. She'd never heard of the place before she received the letter. It had arrived without a return address, written in sharp, angular handwriting she didn't recognize. You've been chosen. The forest calls to its own. The rest was vague, instructions to come to Blackwood Hollow and nothing more. Beth had almost thrown it away, dismissing it as some bizarre prank, but the nightmares grew worse. She couldn't shake the feeling that the letter and her restless nights were connected. As the train slowed to a stop, Beth stepped off into the crisp air. The station was barely more than a platform, its weathered wood sign creaking in the wind. The forest loomed close, its presence oppressive, as though it were watching her.
"Welcome to Blackwood Hollow," a voice said.
Beth turned to see a man standing a few feet away. He was older, with a hunched posture and watery blue eyes. His smile didn't quite reach them.
"You're the first of the newcomers,"
he said, his voice rasping.
Newcomers?
Beth asked. The man nodded.
"You'll see. Follow the path to the inn. They'll explain everything."
Beth hesitated, but decided against pressing further. She adjusted her backpack and started down the dirt path he gestured toward. The inn appeared suddenly, nestled in a clearing like a spider lying in wait. Its windows glowed with warm light, but the structure itself was unsettling. Its wooden planks were gnarled and warped, almost organic in shape. Beth pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. A woman stood behind the counter, her sharp green eyes piercing.
Beth,
she said, her voice smooth and practiced.
how do you know my name?
Beth asked, taking a step back.
We've been expecting you,
the woman replied. She didn't elaborate.
Room 4, supper is at 7.
Before Beth could ask anything more, the woman turned and disappeared into a back room. Left with no choice, Beth made her way to her room. The walls of the narrowed hallway seemed to pulse as she walked, as if the wood itself were breathing. Her skin crawled, and she forced herself to move faster, her boots echoing on the floorboards. Room 4 was small, with a single bed and a window that looked out onto the forest. As she set her backpack down, she noticed something odd. The wallpaper was peeling in places, revealing a strange, fleshy surface beneath. When she reached out to touch it, it was warm. Beth recoiled, her heart racing. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should leave. But as she turned back to the door, the faint sound of footsteps caught her attention. Someone was walking in the hall, slow and deliberate. She pressed her ear to the door, holding her breath. The footsteps stopped right outside her room, and then came a barely audible whisper.
Chosen.
Beth yanked the door open, but the hallway was empty. By the time supper rolled around, Beth was on edge. The dining room was dimly lit, with a long wooden table at its center. Several other people were seated around it, their faces a mix of confusion and unease.
You got the letter too?
A young man asked, his voice shaking. Beth nodded.
Do you know why we're here?
He shook his head.
No one will tell me anything. Just that the forest...
He trailed off, glancing nervously at the window. Before Beth could ask what he meant, the woman from the counter entered the room, followed by the man from the station.
Welcome,
the woman began. Her voice had an unnatural quality to it, like wind rushing through hollow trees.
You've all been chosen by the forest. It's an honor.
Chosen for what?
Another guest demanded, her voice trembling. The woman's smile widened.
To become one with it.
The room fell silent.
What the hell does that mean?
Beth asked, her voice rising. Before the woman could respond, a deep groan reverberated through the walls. The lights flickered, and Beth felt it again, that sticky, pulsating warmth. She looked down and saw something oozing up from the cracks in the floorboards. It was red and wet, like exposed muscle. People screamed, scrambling to get away, but the door slammed shut on its own.
The forest has beckoned you,
the woman said, her voice echoing unnaturally.
There's no escaping it.
The floor beneath Beth began to move, undulating like a living thing. She tried to run, but her legs felt heavy. Looking down, she saw her feet sinking into the fleshy floor. Beth screamed as she clawed at the table for support, but it was no use. The others were screaming too, their bodies slowly being consumed by the writhing mass of tissue. Beth's vision blurred as the forest itself seemed to surge into the room. Its branches twisted through the walls, dripping with a viscous sap-like substance. The smell of decay and wet earth filled her lungs, and then everything went black. When Beth woke, she was outside. The forest was silent, its towering trees watching her like silent sentinels. She tried to move, but realized she couldn't. Looking down, she saw that her arms were embedded in the ground, her skin blending seamlessly with the soil. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the forest. Her body was changing, the flesh of her arms turning rough and bark-like. Branches sprouted from her fingers, twisting upward as if reaching for the sky. Her mind reeled as she realized what was happening. She wasn't just in the forest, she was becoming it. She could feel it now, the collective consciousness of the trees, the vines, the roots. They spoke to her in whispers, their voices ancient and overwhelming. They showed her memories of others who had been chosen, their bodies sacrificed to feed the forest's insatiable hunger. Tears streamed down her face as she fought against the transformation, but it was no use. Her legs fused with the ground, her torso stretched upward, her skin splitting open to reveal veins of sap. As her vision faded, she saw others around her, their faces frozen in silent screams, their bodies twisted into grotesque tree-like forms. And then, she felt peace. The forest had claimed her, and she was finally home.